The theme of the conference is change. And there are two aspects of change. One is, or let's say there are two aspects of our response to change. One is that you adopt change, and the other is you adapt change. Both are very important. In many situations, we have to adopt some change, okay? And in some situations, the change has happened, and so we have to adapt ourselves to it. Now, as far as adoption is concerned, it really essentially requires reallocation of resources. Okay, and these resources may be physical, may be spatial, may be temporal, may be cognitive. So you have to now reallocate your resources in order to adopt something into your life. The other aspect, which is to do with adapting, you adapt yourself to change. Now, this requires much more effort. It requires relearning, it requires reskilling, which is quite arduous. And I think this is where one has to look at evolution and try to understand how evolution adapts. Life is very much about adapting and adopting. So these are the two things which are absolutely crucial to understanding life. Life is very agile, and if you have to adapt, then you have to be very agile. You have to be very open like a child. You see, then only you can adapt yourself. Otherwise, you are resisting all the time. Adapting and adopting is really the story of life itself. It's the story of evolution. Now, the story of evolution really begins, or let's say in a scientific manner, or scientific understanding, it begins with Darwin. Now, Darwin helped humans move beyond the genesis, which essentially means that the divine origin of life. And what he propounded was that life is self-steering, it is autonomous. There are random mutations that are happening. There is a law of natural selection. There is a survival of the fittest. And this is how life keeps evolving. And at the time when he propounded his origin of species, of course, there was a lot of resistance from the church and etc. etc. The whole society was in a very different framework of mind. Do you remember Galileo and how Galileo was imprisoned because he said that the sun is in the center and Earth moves around it. Now, Darwin is one aspect, and about 100 years later, in 1959, we had Dr. Robert MacArthur, and he did some very seminal work, phenomenal work. And what he showed was there is no struggle in evolution. It is more issue of cooperation and collaboration. And in his study, he was studying warbler birds. And there were 5 types of birds in that forest. And what was very interesting is that these birds, rather than competing each other for resources, they had partitioned the resources. And what you see here is the pine tree. And different birds have different areas. They would only harvest insects and food from that area. So they would not only spatially partition, but also temporally partition, that is time-wise. They would have different times when they would come to feed themselves. Now, this is a very important understanding. Darwin was with us some 150 years, and so he has a head start as far as making us think in his direction, which is survival of the fittest, random mutations. Our society today is very much framed in the Darwinian thinking. Later research, the evolutionary biologists, the findings of the evolutionary biologists have shown much more light. And one of this is to do with partitioning of resources, which means that we can be fitter in surviving if we can partition resources. There's no point in fighting with each other. There's no conflict. There's no competition. we can agree to partition resources, both time-wise and spatial-wise. This is another interesting finding where you found that ants, beehives, etc., they work as a collective, and there is partitioning of labor, there's partitioning of skills, and different ants would take up different roles, and they have a set of rules. They follow those set of rules, and by following those set of rules, they can do amazing things. So this is another understanding of evolution. So if we have to survive, this is another aspect that we have to look at. Okay? We play a role in a team. Okay? We have different skills, we work together, and then we achieve our goals. Here is another very interesting study by Suzanne and Peter, and you must definitely read this book called The Hidden Life of Trees. And you know, trees are rooted. They just cannot go anywhere. They are where they are. They're dependent. They have tremendous amount of trust, let us say. They have tremendous amount of trust in nature that they will be provided for. Now, in this study, what they found is that the trees were also cooperating and collaborating with each other. They were communicating with each other. They were sending food to each other. They were protecting each other. If there is, let's say, a tree which is in the shade is not able to develop enough carbon, then another tree would send the food over to that tree which is in the shade. Now, this is happening not only in case of trees of the same species, but they are also helping trees of other species. So the species also help each other by creating different types of biological molecules which are required for survival. Okay? There are no doctors there, there is no hospitals there. So it is all the medicines are created in the jungle itself, and they are provided for by each other. This is another thing that you have coral reefs, and in the coral reefs you have tremendous amount of biodiversity. And it is again here that different types of molecules which are required for existence of different types of fishes are available here. So it is a place which has the physical characteristic of providing shelter and at the same time providing food. And you have these coral reef with phenomenal amount of diversity, phenomenal amount of creativity. Here is another study of Yellowstone National Park. And in 1926, what they had done was, this is the evil man, you see, they killed all the wolves there. The result was that the whole ecosystem was upset. Then recently, they reintroduced the wolves into the national park, Yellowstone National Park. And lo and behold, the whole ecology was revived. Frogs came in, beavers came in, beavers built dams, it flooded the river, it provided more water to the foliage, the trees became greener. They even say that the wolves changed the course of the river. So this is how things are interlinked. So nature is a very complex thing. There is tremendous amount of intelligence there. As far as I'm concerned, all thinking, all knowledge, all thinking, as far as management is concerned, as far as design is concerned, as far as engineering is concerned, it's all there in the nature. If I look at our technology, it is based on heat, beat, and treat. Okay? Whereas in nature, everything is happening at room temperature. And they can create the most complex structures, skeletons that can take tons of load, and so on and so forth. Then this is another thing which is very important, that nature is looking in a very holistic manner. Okay? So you have vultures, and the vultures are making sure that a dead carcass does not stay in the jungle for very long. If it stays they're long, then it putrefies. There are lots of harmful bacteria and viruses which can grow. And that would create pandemics, epidemics in the jungle itself. It would create harm to the other living creatures. Now, the human brain has evolved after these 4 billion years of experience. So there is tremendous amount of intelligence therein in this human brain. There is tremendous amount of intelligence that is there in our DNA and our RNA structures. Okay? And when it is called for, then it can come about, it can come forth. Maybe one day we'll be able to sprout a tail if it is necessary. Okay? At present, it is not necessary. Those gene chains are suppressed. Now, look at the human brain, the type of things human beings can do. Phenomenal. Everything it can do. It can visualize those things which even the senses have not perceived. It can imagine that, it can visualize it. A good example is semiconductors. There are no examples of semiconductors in nature, but human brain is able to devise that based on essentially deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, interpolation, extrapolation. And then you say, okay, if this is true, then this must be true, and let's verify that, let's experiment in this direction. And you have electronics, you have semiconductors. Now, the human brain can do anything, it can do marvelous things. It can be very compassionate also, it can be a mathematician also. It can be a criminal also. You can have somebody who's mentally ill, who can be a suicide bomber, okay? Somebody who deceives. So all that capabilities is there in the human brain. It is for you to give a challenge to your brain and decide what you want the brain to do. The brain will bring out the answer. And that is what Einstein did, this is what Wright brothers did, this is what Marconi did, this is what Louis Pasteur did. Now, coming to pandemics, the word pandemic comes from a Greek god called Pan. The worship of Pan began in rustic areas, far from populated centers. I mean, it is quite interesting that pandemics have a lot to do with sort of anger within the nature. And when the COVID-19 took place, within a few days, we found that the birds were celebrating. The animals had come down into our cities. They were strolling around in the roads. And so we may be suffering, we may have gone into hiding, but the rest of the nature was really celebrating. Here is another thing. The Hindu mythology talks of Vishnu, Lord Vishnu, and the many incarnations of Vishnu. And if you look at the first two, they were more designerly in nature. Okay? So there was extreme flooding that had happened, and so Vishnu took the birth of a fish. Now, rest of the incarnations have to do with containing people who thought they can be superpowers and would conquer all the worlds. And thereby they were disturbing the symbiosis that existed between the earth, the Patal Lok, and the Swargalok. And now this, what I'm not saying is this true or not true. What is important is that somebody made a story and thought it worthwhile to propagate it generation after generation. This is what is important. And here the pandemics were happening because there was an egoistic person who wanted to be a superpower, who wanted to be the only one. There was no symbiosis, there was no cooperation, collaboration, no teamwork. They did not believe in that, and that was upsetting the whole ecology. Now, this is the other thing, which is the man-made pandemics. Okay, they are impending, and they are all based on consumerism and waste that we are generating. In nature, there is no waste. Whatever waste is there is raw material for new life. And this is important to understand. Okay? Now, humans, if dinosaurs could exist for millions of years, and I see no reason why human beings should not plan to be on planet Earth for another million years. But the way we are going, it is predicted that by 2050, well, things would be very, very, very bad. So what is there behind all these man-made endemics and pandemics? And it is some assumptions that we have made. And these assumptions are that consumption and production enhances well-being. Free market economy will shape the future of mankind. And you see, in free market economy, nobody would prepare for pandemics. It's not that there were no people talking of an impending pandemic. It was well known. But the free market economy cannot work. Once they have a huge enough market, now we have a huge enough market, so they'll all work on vaccines, no problem. It is natural to economically grow in terms of material riches. It is natural to contain anybody who threatens our position in the above. Progress is in the fittest surviving. Now, our life assumptions have to change. We need to give a new challenge to our brain. And the brain has the capacity to solve it. Okay? Now, what is the new challenge? We have to respect life. When we say respect life, it is my life, your life, everyone's life has to be respected. We have to evolve human life regimes that do not pollute our atmosphere, our land, and our water bodies. Evolve human life regimes that does not pollute and disturb the functioning of our biological biomes. We have to be mindful of material and energy information that we use in the pursuit of our lifestyle. We have to create components, products, system, service, and environment in an open architecture so that it can have long life. You don't have to throw it away. It should not become obsolete. It should be upgradable. It should be reusable. It should be recyclable. We have to create closed, isolated supply chain for situations that could have detrimental effect on the biological ecosystem. And when I write this, I have specifically this plastic waste in mind. Okay? There is no reason why plastic waste should reach the ocean. We have to create a closed cycle so that plastic waste can be recycled back, can be arrested and taken back. Then there is more to how we should design and allocate functions more to man than to machine, design for upgradability, multi-purpose products. We have to design for repurposing, design for recycling, downcycling, upcycling. And but the real challenge is, can man stop, ponder, and reboot their role on the planet, clean up our lifestyles? Then we are always prone to pandemics because the immune system. So with this few words, I thank you all very much for giving me a hearing.